everybody, it's Skye Schooley here, a staff writer with business.com. And if you're watching this video, it's probably because you're considering outsourcing work as opposed to hiring an employee to do the job. Now, while there are several advantages to an outsourcing partnership, there are a few things that you want to keep in mind. So to get some insight on this topic, today I'm joined by Dan Olson. He is the CEO of UpCity, which is a resource that helps connect businesses to service providers. So Dan, as you know, we are talking about outsourcing work today. And to get started, can you tell us a little bit about how does a small business owner know when they should outsource work as opposed to hire an employee?
It's a great question. And as we all know, it can be very stressful when you're trying to figure out, okay, now I want to add a resource to my team. And that can be a full-time person. It can be, a freelancer, a brand, somebody to come in and like get something knocked out for you. So we look at it from two perspectives. First, what's the scope, right? Is this 40 hours a week? Is it 10 hours a week? Is it 10 hours a month? Is it a project-based? So that really will determine a lot in terms of if it's a project-based, situation, you don't want to go full-time, obviously. And then because they're done in 30 to 45 days, and then there's some tough things after that. So you really want to make sure you scope it as best you can, understand kind of what hours you're really thinking about. So that'll help a lot. The next one that we look at when you think about this type of decision is expertise. So do you need is it a very specific type of expertise, like building websites, doing, very complicated marketing tactics, IT services, and networking out your office space, those types of things where you probably should pay a little bit more for someone for a less amount of time can really tip the scales to outsourcing it and working with a third party. So those, I'd say, the two biggest ones. Once you kind of knock those, answer those questions for yourself, it should put you in the right direction.
Awesome. And so for somebody who is considering outsourcing work, what are some of the biggest factors that they should consider? For example, maybe it's cost or location, or maybe portfolio.
Sure.
What does that look like?
Sure. So, we spend a lot of time thinking about this because at UpCity, our goal and why we built this company was to help small businesses make great decisions around what service providers to work with. So, we think about factors and all those types of things a lot, and we baked it into our algorithm that helps our buyers come in and figure out, of the 80,000 providers we have, who should I trust for what? And so I think the first component, you kind of touched on it here, is portfolio, which gets into trust, really understanding, what kind of work someone's done for whom. With our, we have a profile that a business can build out on our site, and portfolio is a really important part. What videos do people have? What type of presentations or mock-ups, those types of things that really help someone exhibit their skill sets. In addition to that, around trust, that's why we have a big focus around reviews. So we've got, almost 30,000 reviews in our platform, and I would almost consider those mini surveys. They're relatively significant in terms of the amount of questions we ask from people, but ultimately we want to make sure and grab as much information from current customers so that prospective customers and buyers have a really good sense of what they're doing. So I think that the biggest factor we think that we try to plug and address as quickly as possible with our platform is trust. Then those other components come into play, right? Cost and location, those sorts of things are obviously big components. Thinking about what your budget is and location. And I think, with location is a pretty interesting one these days. With COVID and more people being remote this past year, it probably put that into question more. Does someone have to be in my backyard to help me with what I'm doing? Obviously, if it's on-site work like IT work, you have to do that with someone locally. But a website can be built some places. What we think is really interesting is when you search for a web designer, for example, in any market, let's say Chicago, it's near and dear. Google still sees that as local intent, and it is something where let's show a bunch of web designers on the map, other web designers in this area, because again, I think all things being equal, someone in Chicago may trust working with someone in Chicago a little bit more than someplace else, right? It's a smaller business community, even though it's a big town. But those types of things can really help you. Again, I think address that trust factor, have someone in your backyard, get to know that person a little bit more personally. But if you're in a smaller market and maybe the people that are around you you might want to, maybe there isn't as that type of expertise that you're looking for. And I think now more than ever, there's opportunities to engage really smart people in lots of different places. So that'll be an interesting one as small businesses think about that. And then last and not least is cost. And so, platforms like us grab a lot of cost information about what it takes to work with a certain provider and those sorts of things. And so leveraging those inputs are really important, and being able to filter and search by those things are major factors that you definitely need to take into account.
Awesome. And are there any sort of maybe disadvantages or challenges to outsourcing work? And if so, how does an employer maybe overcome those?
Sure. I think the biggest disadvantages or challenges we've seen is you're meeting someone for the first time, right? So again, it's we have a project. We had to do some IT work to build out our space here. We don't know anything about it, folks, right? So doing that online research and doing all those things, like leveraging our own, we used UpCity.com to help us make a decision like that, take some of the stress out. But there's chances where there's a big disconnect, right? And so the challenge I always think is information transfer and making sure someone understands what the project is, what our expectations are. Those misalignments happen a lot. We see that in a lot of spaces. Some more so maybe in marketing and sales, when a buyer's thinking, oh, you're going to double my business, right, because of this engagement or partnership. Having those things really out of whack up front can really create a challenge downstream. So making sure everybody's really aligned up around the give and take of that, and providing information and transparency on both sides, I think can really mitigate some of those disadvantages and challenges.
I do think that it's important for every small business owner, as well as contractors and freelancers, to know what sets the foundation for a very solid outsourcing partnership.
Sure. A couple of things I talked about. And I think, to us, there's always been a consistent gap. Our background is more in marketing, and that is an area where you can get a large gap. And so from our thoughts, a solid foundation is doing that research. Looking online, as we've seen more and more people are doing that, which is awesome. Small businesses can, 60% of the time they've already started to make a decision before they even talk to a provider, because they're looking at online resources, right? Again, you and I can look at Yelp and find a really great place to grab a steak here in Chicago. But in the past, people haven't quite been used to doing the same thing about their next IT job. So that's why we're here. And I think, the algorithm we have put in place to do these types of things are set up in a way to mitigate that risk as much as possible, provide as much information as possible. And so we think that foundation is in, doing your research, looking at online resources like UpCity.com. And what we're doing on behalf of the buyer is looking at their Google My Business page, looking at how prevalent they are in search. How many reviews have they put on our platform? Like I said, there are many surveys, so we're extracting a lot of information there. So I think that foundation that we provide sets it up for trust, and then everything starts from there. And everything can build upon that once you establish that trust in each other, as a buyer and a seller of services. Then everything really can work out well for both sides.
Great. And I guess to just kind of round us out, did you have any final advice for small businesses that are considering outsourcing work, especially those who might be doing it for the first time?
Sure. The first thing I would say is take a deep breath. It can be really stressful. It's something that, anytime as a small business owner, you're deploying a little to a lot of capital, can be really stressful. So take a deep breath. It is something that ultimately, though, can really be rewarding for your business. And so it's important for you to know that. But as I mentioned earlier, really doing that research up front, it can help out a lot. And thinking about, well, what would I like to see? Here's other work they've done. Here's other people who have, references, those types of things, reviews. All those components can really reduce your risk up front. But then the second part I kind of alluded to earlier is how, we always think of these as almost marriages, right? Because there's a lot of work you need to do up front to make sure both folks understand each other and understand where they're coming from, what they're trying to accomplish. But then how can we build these long-term relationships for like 12 months from now? These are still working. And so there's a lot of communication. There's a lot of work. Don't assume you can hire someone, say, hey, go fix this, and never have to speak to them again, right? So, having that ongoing dialogue and conversation is really important. And because there's going to be bumps, there's going to be challenges. someone's going to build a website for you and there's going to be some technical issue that, you got to make sure there's a really good lines of communication to work through those things as a partnership, and think of it that way. So make sure, do the work up front, but make sure to know there's going to be some ongoing work as well to make it be really successful for you.
Awesome. Well, I think that was all that we had for today, Dan. Thank you so much for your time.
Of course, Skye, my pleasure.